Get out of my house. Go die in a dumpster. The words struck harder than the rain pelting my face. The door slammed, rattling the brass knob, and I was left staring at the wood grain as if it had just swallowed me whole. My suitcase sat at my feet like a discarded dog, its handle slick under my trembling hand. I didn't argue. I didn't even raise my voice. The silence that followed her scream was louder than thunder, heavier than grief. All I could do was breathe in the cold night air, feel the rain soak through my coat, and taste the metallic sting of humiliation on my tongue. I glanced once at the window above me. No movement, no light, just the reflection of an old man staring back at himself, a man who had just been erased from his own home. My fingers tightened around the suitcase handle. The leather creaked. For a moment, I thought of dropping it right there on the stone steps and walking away with nothing. But no, something inside me, something deeper than pride, told me to hold on, to carry it, to carry everything she thought she had taken from me. So I turned. My shoes sank slightly into the wet earth as I walked down the pathway. The rain followed me, beating down harder, until every step felt like a drumbeat, marking the end of one life and the beginning of another. And here's the part she never saw coming. 5 days later, the same woman who threw me out into the storm would be on her knees before me, begging for a single dollar. 5 days. That's all it took. I was sitting in a chair across from her, a woman once untouchable, in her own mind, now trembling in front of me. Her expensive shoes, ones that probably cost more than everything in my suitcase, were scuffed. Her hands shook as she clutched her designer handbag like it was a lifeline, and then she dropped to her knees. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Just $1. That's all I need. Just one." For a moment, I didn't speak. I wanted her words to hang in the air, to echo the same way hers had echoed in my ears when she threw me out into the rain. Go die in a dumpster. Now those same lips were begging me for scraps. I studied her carefully. Her lipstick was smudged. Mascara streaked down her cheeks. She had tried to hold on to her mask of control, but desperation strips away pride faster than any storm. And there, in that moment, I didn't see a wealthy widow or the self-proclaimed queen of a fortune. I saw only fear, raw, hollow fear. "You're asking me," I said slowly, my voice low, "for a single dollar?" Her eyes snapped up to meet mine. "Yes," she said, too quickly, the word tumbling out like a child caught stealing. "Please, I just need something to cover until... She stopped herself. Until what? Until she could manipulate again? Until she could pretend the world still belonged to her? I leaned back, folding my hands over my lap. I didn't answer her yet. Silence can be sharper than words, and I wanted her to feel every second of it. The way she shifted on her knees told me she was feeling it plenty. Finally, I spoke. "Do you remember what you told me?" Her lips parted. No sound came out. She knew. The memory of her own cruelty burned behind her eyes. But here's the thing. You don't get the full story yet. You don't know why the woman who once controlled $55 million had collapsed before me, begging for a dollar like a beggar in the street. Not yet. That answer comes later. For now, just remember this image. A woman who thought she had everything, brought lower than she ever believed possible. And in that silence between us, I knew something she didn't. This was only the beginning. Before she begged, she conquered. I'll never forget the first time I saw it. The smile. It wasn't a smile of grief or gratitude. Not even of relief after my son's funeral. No, it was the quiet, razor-sharp smile of a victor. A smile meant to tell me I was no longer part of the story. It happened in the lawyer's office. I sat across from her, my hands folded tightly, listening to the droning voice of Mr. Davies as he read line after line of my son's will. The legal words blurred together like static. Assets, portfolios, controlling shares, real estate. I could barely breathe as each clause placed more of David's legacy into her manicured hands. And then my name was read, not as an heir, not as a protector, just a footnote. To my father, I leave my deepest gratitude. Gratitude. That was it. The weight of decades reduced to a single polite sentence. I looked across the table, and that's when I saw it. The corner of her lips curled, not in mourning, but in triumph. Her eyes flicked toward me, cold and glinting, and that faint smile told me everything. I've won. You're nothing now. It chilled me more than the rain ever could. I didn't speak. I didn't challenge. I sat still as the pen scratched across the paper, finalizing her ascension. She was already sitting like a CEO at a hostile takeover. Her posture perfect, her hands folded like a ruler about to dismiss her counsel. And when the reading ended, she stood, smoothed her suit, and walked past me as if I were an antique chair left in the corner. No glance, no word, just her perfume trailing behind her, expensive and suffocating. That was the moment I realized. The storm hadn't passed with David's burial. It had only just begun. But remember this, smiles like hers never last, not when they're carved from greed. And though she walked out of that office, believing she held the world, she had no idea a trap had already been set. She claimed the house the way a conqueror claims new land, by erasing what came before. The day after the will was read, she walked through the rooms like an inspector, not a widow. Her heels clicked on the floorboards David and I had laid with our own hands, each step sounding like a verdict. These pictures, she said, pointing to a wall of photographs, fishing trips, birthdays, my wife's smile, my son's boyish grin. All frozen memories of a family she had married into, not built. They all have to go. Clutter. We need a cleaner aesthetic. She didn't even look at me as she said it. She spoke as though I were invisible, as though the history on those walls had never belonged to me. Then she moved to the library. David's library. Our library. I had built those shelves with him, staining the oak until our hands were raw. Every book told two stories, the one inside its pages, and the one of how it found its way to those shelves. These can be sold, she announced, running a manicured finger across the spines of his first editions. I'm sure they're worth something. Her phone rang then, and she answered it on speaker. Her voice carried through the room, cold and sharp. Yes, it's confirmed. 55 million, not including the property. Complete control. She said it while staring directly at me, like she wanted me to hear every syllable, as if she wanted to press her victory into my skin. And in that moment, I knew. I wasn't just a guest anymore. I was a ghost, haunting her new kingdom, and she was preparing an exorcism. But here's what she didn't know. Ghosts don't disappear so easily, especially when the foundations of the house itself were built on something she couldn't erase. I didn't sleep the night she threw me out, not because of the rain or the cold motel room I ended up in, but because of the words that kept circling in my mind. My son was not careless. David was a planner. He could see patterns in markets, in people, in life itself. And yet, in that lawyer's office, It had felt like he had left me with nothing, nothing but gratitude in a single line of his will. It didn't add up. I sat on the edge of that sagging motel bed, staring at the buzzing neon sign outside the window, and I whispered to myself, he knew. He had to have known. The thought wouldn't leave me. David had loved Chloe, yes, but he wasn't blind. He saw through people, sometimes more clearly than they saw themselves. If he had truly trusted her with everything, it meant one of two things. Either he had been a fool, or he had left something hidden. That's when I made the call. Mr. Davies answered on the second ring. His voice was calm, too calm, as though he had been waiting for me. Robert, he said softly, I was about to call you. That one sentence chilled me more than Chloe's fury ever had. He was about to call me. He was expecting this moment. David, he continued, his voice dropping, didn't leave you out. He left me with instructions. Sealed. Instructions I could only follow under certain conditions. And Chloe, she just triggered them. The motel room fell silent around me. I could hear nothing but the hum of the mini fridge and my own breath, sharp and uneven. A sealed envelope, a hidden instruction, a second game within the will. I gripped the phone tighter. What are you saying? I asked, my voice steady, though my heart pounded. I'm saying, Davies replied, that your son didn't abandon you. He prepared a test, and Chloe has already failed it. Your son, Mr. Davies said, his voice low and deliberate, was never one to leave anything to chance. I could picture David in that moment, hunched over his laptop late at night, brow furrowed, eyes scanning lines of code or contracts, always 2 steps ahead of everyone else. My boy wasn't reckless. He was careful. He was deliberate. And if he had loved Chloe enough to give her everything, then he had loved me enough to protect me from her. Mr. Davies went on. What we read in my office, that was the legal surface, the part everyone could see. But David built a second layer, a clause hidden so deep it only activates when one condition is met. Betrayal. The word stung. Betrayal. I tightened my grip on the motel phone, my knuckles white. So you're telling me, I whispered, that everything she has isn't really hers? There was a pause on the other end, the kind of silence lawyers use when they're choosing their words carefully. Let's just say this, he replied. David believed in character more than fortune. He wanted to give her the chance to prove herself, but he also knew the odds. He called it his character test. And Robert, she's already failed. My chest tightened, not with anger this time, but with something heavier, vindication laced with grief. My son had seen what I had refused to see, and even from beyond the grave, he was still playing the game. Tomorrow, Davies continued, I'll unseal the envelope. That's when you'll see your son's true will. Until then, I need you to do one thing. What? Disappear. I blinked at the flickering motel light, the word hanging in the air. Disappear. He explained it calmly. If she believes you're broken, gone, defeated, she'll act with arrogance. She'll show the world exactly who she is. And when she does, the trap will close on its own. For the first time since that door slammed in my face, I felt something stir inside me. Not hope. No. Something steadier. Resolve. I leaned back on the creaking mattress, phone still pressed to my ear, and whispered almost to myself, All right, David, let's play your game. While I sat in that dim motel room, hidden from the world, she was parading through it as though she had conquered a kingdom. Davies kept me informed in careful, measured updates, His tone never changed, but I could hear the irony in his words. She's burning through money she doesn't have, he told me. And the best part, she doesn't even know it. First, it was the boutiques. She didn't browse. She pointed. Handbags, dresses, watches that cost more than my first house. Each purchase was less about the item and more about the statement. I own this. I own everything. Then came the cars. She didn't settle for luxury. She demanded spectacle. A blood-red machine with doors that opened like wings. She slapped down a deposit as though the car already belonged to her, laughing when the salesman asked about the rest. The money's coming, she said. Don't worry. And finally, the house. My son's house. My house. She walked through it with a designer at her side, pointing at floors, walls, shelves, as if she were marking targets for demolition. This room, she said of the library, is a morgue. Rip it out. I want white walls and glass. A juice bar here. A juice bar, where David's favorite chair once stood. I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I just listened, as Davies relayed every word, because my silence wasn't defeat. It was the rope she was using to hang herself. The climax of her parade came 3 nights later. A party, music thundering through the house, champagne flowing like water, strangers laughing in rooms that once held our memories. And at the center of it all was Chloe, radiant in her victory, toasting to a future she believed she had stolen fair and square. But the higher you climb on arrogance, the harder the fall. And while she laughed, while she danced, while she declared herself untouchable, the trap was already tightening around her ankles. The morning after her party, the hangover wasn't from champagne. It was from reality. She strutted into a cafe downtown, dressed to be seen, her new designer bag slung proudly over her shoulder. To anyone watching, she was the picture of wealth, a queen savoring her new reign. She ordered without hesitation, coffee, a pastry, something extravagant. And when the bill came, she didn't even look at the price. She pulled out her new black card, the one linked to the estate. She handed it over with that same little smirk she always wore when she thought the world was bowing at her feet. The barista swiped. A pause. A frown. He swiped again. Ma'am, I'm sorry. It's been declined. The words were simple, polite, but they landed like a hammer blow. Chloe laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that turned heads. That's impossible. Try again. He did. Same result. Declined. Her face flushed. Not with shame. She was too proud for that. But with something worse. Fear. The kind of fear money was supposed to protect her from. She fumbled for another card. Declined again. A woman at a nearby table looked up, curious, and Chloe's composure cracked just a little more. She pulled cash from her handbag, crisp bills meant for tips, and shoved them at the counter, snatching her coffee with shaking hands. She left the cafe in silence, her heels clicking too fast, her breath shallow. The moment she slid into her car, she was on the phone with the bank, her voice low but venomous. I wasn't there, but I've heard enough transcripts to know exactly how she sounded. What do you mean? A procedural hold. That's my money. The banker's voice was calm, almost bored. I'm afraid, Mrs. Peterson, that all accounts connected to the estate are temporarily restricted pending evaluation. Her fury must have boiled over then. But anger doesn't open locked doors. And for the first time, Chloe realized she wasn't holding a fortune. She was holding air. And while she sat in her expensive car, seething and trembling, I was in a small motel room, sitting perfectly still, the ghost she thought she had buried, listening to Davies explain how the first cracks in her world had just begun to spread. Greed builds castles fast, but it only takes a whisper of truth to bring them down. The first whisper was the cafe. The second came before she even made it home. Her phone lit up, one call after another. The car dealership, the interior designer, the caterer from her grand party. Each voice different, but all saying the same thing. Where's the money? The dealer was blunt. Mrs. Peterson, we've waited 72 hours for your payment. Your deposit is forfeited. The car is gone. The designer was sharper, more cutting. My crew stood outside your mansion this morning. Legal papers pinned to the door. We can't touch a single wall until the estate clears. And by the way, you owe me for wasted hours. The caterer, almost mocking. We need settlement of your balance. We don't do charity buffets, Mrs. Peterson. Each call was another stone sliding out of the foundation she had built her new life on. By evening, her phone went quiet, not because the world had forgiven her, but because the world no longer answered. The friends who had filled her house with laughter and praise after her party disappeared just as quickly as they arrived. Calls went to voicemail. Messages were left unread. The empire of admirers she thought she'd purchased crumbled into silence. And in that silence, she panicked. I wasn't there to see it, but I can picture it. Her pacing through those empty rooms, clutching her phone, rage turning into desperation, her voice cracking as she screamed at Davies's office, demanding explanations, threatening lawsuits, insisting she was in control. But she wasn't. She had never been. And while she raged in her hollow mansion, I sat in my small motel room, the hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet, and thought of my son. He had built the snare so perfectly, so patiently. All I had to do was wait. By the fifth day, the silence in her grand house had become unbearable. She couldn't call the bank without hearing the same cold phrase, procedural hold. She couldn't call her new friends because they no longer picked up, and she couldn't buy her way out of fear because every door she tried was locked tight. So she went searching. She drove across the city in her luxury car, the one still technically mine through the estate, knocking on doors she once dismissed. Old friends of mine, neighbors who had shared dinners with David and me, people she had looked down on with her perfect smile and sharp tongue. Have you seen Robert? She asked them. I imagine her tone was half demand, half plea, and at every doorstep, she met the same answer. No, we haven't seen him. The irony must have stung. The woman who cast me out now stood begging for scraps of information, turned away by the very people she once disdained. By evening, her desperation curdled into something rawer. She called Davies again, her voice shrill, trying to bully him, then soften him, then scream at him. He listened in silence, then repeated the truth. The estate is sealed. You cannot touch a cent. Her fury spent. She had nowhere left to turn. Nowhere, except to the one man she had thrown into the rain with nothing but a suitcase. And that's what led her, 5 days after she told me to go die in a dumpster, to find me. Not as a queen, not as an owner of millions, but as a woman stripped bare, clutching her handbag like a lifeline, her eyes red, her voice trembling. And then she dropped to her knees. Please, she whispered, her voice cracking. Just $1. It was a sight I never thought I'd see. The woman who had once stood tall in designer heels, the woman who smirked across polished tables as lawyers signed away my son's legacy, was now trembling on her knees before me. Her voice cracked as she whispered again, Please, just $1. I stared at her, not with triumph, not with anger, but with something colder. Silence, because silence weighs more than any word. It forces truth out of the shadows. And in that silence, her mask shattered. She tried to speak again, tried to reach for some excuse. "I wasn't thinking," she stammered. "Things got out of control. The pressure, the grief. You don't understand." I did understand. I understood better than she ever could. This wasn't grief. It wasn't pressure. It was greed, laid bare at last. Her hands trembled as she clutched her handbag, nails clicking against the metal clasp. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. A cornered animal, stripped of its bite. I leaned forward, my voice low, measured. "Do you remember what you told me?" Her head snapped up, eyes wide. She remembered. She couldn't forget. The venom of her own words burned across her face. "Go die in a dumpster." But I didn't repeat them. I didn't need to. My silence carried them back to her, louder than any echo. She lowered her head again, shoulders shaking. And for a moment, I almost felt pity. Almost. But then I thought of David, his laugh, his library, his promise that this house would always be ours. And the pity died. Because this wasn't just about me. This was about him. About the game he had set in motion long before this moment. And as I watched her crumble, I knew the time had finally come. Not for my revenge, not for her humiliation, but for my son's true will to step out of the shadows. She thought the begging would sway me. It didn't. All it did was open the door to the next step of the game. David's step. Davies had been waiting. He always spoke with that steady, measured tone. But when I walked into his office that morning, he looked at me differently. Not as a client, not even as a friend, but as a man carrying out the last wish of my son. The waiting room smelled of leather and paper, the kind of place where verdicts are written in ink instead of shouted from benches. I sat with my book in hand, calm as I could be. And then she entered. Chloe. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes wrinkled, her eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. The queen who once swept past me without a glance now looked like she was walking into her own trial. And in a way, she was. She saw me first, stopped dead in the doorway. For a heartbeat, the air went still. I saw every emotion flicker across her face. Confusion, shock, then that creeping horror when the pieces clicked. The ghost she thought she'd buried was sitting right there, alive, steady, waiting. She tried to speak. A weak, "Robert, Father," stumbled from her lips, but it died in the silence between us. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Silence was my verdict, and she felt it. Then the door opened again. Mr. Davies stepped in, his dark suit pressed, his expression unreadable. He looked at her, then at me, and spoke in a voice that cut like glass. "If you'll both follow me, it's time we settle this properly." We walked into the conference room. The polished table gleamed under the lights, long and heavy like a judge's bench. She sat across from me, hands clenched in her lap, while Davies set a single cream-colored envelope in the center of the table. The Peterson seal pressed in blue wax glistened faintly. My son's mark, my son's voice, waiting. "This," Davies said, tapping it gently, "is David's true and final instruction, activated by your actions, Chloe. Not mine, not Robert's, yours." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her eyes were locked on the envelope, as though it might strike her. Davies reached for a small silver opener. The wax cracked, the paper tore, and the sound was sharper than any gavel. The moment had come. The paper unfolded with a crisp snap, and there it was. David's handwriting. Clear, steady, certain. The voice of my son carried across the table as Davies began to read. This is the codicil to my will, he said. It voids all previous instructions in the event of betrayal by the inheritor. All assets, without exception, shares, portfolios, property, will be transferred into the Peterson Legacy Trust. I sat still, my chest heavy, as Davies continued. The sole trustee and administrator of this trust shall be my father, Robert Peterson. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the immense weight of it. David had not left me behind. He had placed the heart of his life's work in my hands. Then came the final blow, read in Davies' even tone. To my wife, Chloe Peterson, the trust shall provide a monthly stipend of $2,000, contingent upon full-time employment and residency in the guest cottage. Any violation of these terms will result in permanent termination of support. Her face drained of color. The Queen's crown had not only slipped, it had turned to ash in her hands. She shook her head, a tiny, desperate motion, as though denial could rewrite the words inked on that page. But it was done. I didn't speak. I didn't gloat. I simply watched as the truth settled on her shoulders like an iron cloak. Moments later, she fainted, collapsing onto the carpet, not as a ruler, not even as an enemy, but as a woman undone by her own choices. And in that silence, I felt David's presence, not in the money, not in the house, but in the clarity of justice. My son hadn't built his legacy on wealth. He built it on purpose. And now, through his plan, that purpose had found me. Months later, I stood in front of a classroom filled with bright, eager faces, the first scholars of the David Peterson Foundation. Their eyes were alive with the same curiosity David once carried. Their hands raised high with questions, dreams, and hunger for more. I told them about my son, not about the millions he earned, but about the boy who once tore apart a television just to see how it worked. I told them about the young man who believed opportunity should belong to everyone, not just the wealthy. And as I looked out at those students, I understood the lesson my son had left me. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't always come with slamming doors or shouted verdicts. Sometimes it's the quiet unfolding of a plan, the soft rip of an envelope, the steady creation of something better in the ruins of what was broken. Chloe's story ended in consequence. Mine began again in purpose. And David's legacy, his true will, was never about the fortune. It was about planting seeds for a future he'd never see. That is the inheritance I guard. That is the gift I now share. And if there's one truth I've learned through all of this, it's this: patience and wisdom will always outlast arrogance and greed. Thank you for walking with me through this story. If it has given you even a spark of strength, share it, pass it on, because sometimes the quietest moves on the chessboard are the ones that change everything.